Okay, hi everyone. Hi again. So, bit of a confession. Back when I had this talk submitted, I don't know, a few months ago, the keynote was not going to have so much Z-Ray content. So I actually planned to show all of the interesting nuts and bolts of Z-Ray, but we've seen much of it. So I've been trying to think what I can use this session for, now that we've seen a large part of what Z-Ray can do. And I reached several ideas, and I'm going to keep you as a part of the session creation team, and try to get your feedback on where I should go with the session. So I have basically 3 ideas. One is to do a bit of a recap of what Z-Ray can do. And based on some feedbacks from the audience after the talk, it may be worth it. I'm not sure that everyone understood really how it works and what it actually means for development. The second thing I thought is to maybe show you in a bit more detail just how easy it is to create a Z-Ray extension. And by the way, on that, we had a tutorial yesterday, long, I think 3 or 4 hour tutorial on how to create extensions. And since a lot of you didn't go there because they didn't know really what Z-Ray is or why it's important to have to know how to extend it, we're going to try and schedule an on-con session, which will be shorter, but still you can get trained on how to create Z-Ray extensions. And the third thing I thought is to open the floor for questions and answers. So I'm sure that you have some of those about Z-Ray. If you have other points of interest around Z-Ray or Zend Server or any other topic that I may be able to answer, please let me know. So just a quick intro about me. So that's me, you can see. I'm a photography enthusiast. You've seen my 3 daughters, and I'm a computer science graduate from the Technion. For some reason, there's some internet rumor that Andy and I never graduated. I don't know why that is, but we did. We managed to graduate a long, long, long time ago. My early technological career has been GW basic apps. That's not really part of the career. That's the stuff I used to do as a kid. And then C++ CGIs. Anyone in the audience ever create a CGI in C++ or other language? Okay, couple. Anyone in C++? Wow, okay. One person in the audience shares this dark background with me. And finally, command and control army systems. And I'm also one of the co-architects and one of the co-founders of Zend. So, why is Z-Ray important? So developers, and when I talk about developers, it's relatively easy for me because I'm a developer myself. So I can basically try to think and characterize myself. And of course, I'm possibly oversimplifying, but I think that developers are creatures of habit. It's very difficult for us to change the way we work. It's very difficult for us to change the tools we work with. Even though text editors evolved, you can probably find a lot of people today in 2014 that are writing PHP using Notepad++ or Vim, and a Seinfeld quote comes to mind. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but essentially try to take one of those diehard Vim people or Notepad++ people and convert them to use an IDE, and it's going to be very, very difficult, next to impossible, because they're so used to use the editor, they've become productive with it, and they become essentially one with the IDE. So it's not just about the tools, it's also about the workflows. Andy mentioned this in the keynote. The most common workflow, possibly, for web development, be it in PHP or other languages, is to fire up whatever text editor you're using, anywhere from Vim into an IDE or anything in between. Then fire up a browser window, develop a bit of code, save, Alt-Tab, or whatever the shortcut is in your operating system, to the browser window, reload, and do that repeatedly. Tools like debuggers, profilers, and other types of introspection tools that can help you pinpoint problems or solve problems or even become aware of issues are kind of a bit foreign to this process. They don't fit into this edit, view, edit, view, edit, view workflow. And that's why I think that even in 2014, a lot of people, myself included, use print statements to do some simple debugging. How many of you still use print statements every once in a while to figure something out? Okay, I'm not alone. I was afraid that I'm going to be like the only person raising my hand, but it's good that we have an honest crowd. So that kind of debugging, I think that the main reason it's being used is because it doesn't deviate from this workflow of editing and viewing the results, editing and viewing the results. You don't need to fire up a third tool. You don't need to set up ports, IPs, restrictions, whatnot. It just works. And we wanted, when we set up to create Z-Ray, we wanted to keep that simple workflow. Instead of kind of being on a missionary, on a mission to change the workflow and convince people that this is wrong. This is not the way professional developers should be developing. But rather, you should be, using a debugger all the time, or periodically, every day, or whatever, use a profiler, and so on and so forth, and review all of the test results of all of your tests and make sure that there's nothing bad there, and so on. We wanted to hook into your existing workflow and present a lot more data, essentially present data in your face so that if and when you need it, it's available for you. And of course, the keynote emphasized Z-Ray quite a bit, but I think one of the most beautiful things about Z-Ray is that it's really non-intrusive. I can imagine that for prolonged periods of time, as you develop with Z-Ray, with Z-Enable that is, you may not be even looking at it. You don't care. You don't bump into it. It's just small, not very intrusive bar at the bottom of your browser. And the beautiful thing about it is that when something smells fishy, then you can just kind of move your eyes to the bottom of the screen and take a closer look at what's going on. Another common workflow is that maybe if something bad was detected by Zend Server, your eyes will notice this red flag popping up and catching your attention, and then you can immediately, as soon as there's a problem, you can dive into it. So actually, one of the great things about Z-Ray is not just the information that it brings to you, it's the fact that you can feel safe to ignore it for as long as you want until you feel the need to use it or until it tries to catch your attention. Okay, that's the point I tried to get across. That's by far my favorite slide. But it's a slide. And that's my universal cue for a live demo. So I'm not going to do the whole demo from the keynote again, but I'm going to do parts of it again and maybe dive into certain parts in a bit more detail and open the floor for some questions. So let's take a look at Z-Ray again. I'm going to look at it with Drupal. So let's do a very quick poll. How many of you are developing on top of Drupal, Magento, or WordPress? Any of them? Okay, not a whole lot. Any stock apps that other guys here are working on, or is it, let me rephrase the question, how many of you are working on completely custom / proprietary applications? Okay, so that's the vast majority. Okay, another question. How many of you are working with Zend Framework, 1 or 2? A bunch. How many of you are working with Symfony? Few. Okay, so so it seems that to the crowd here, the app-specific plugins may be less interesting. There's not a whole lot of you that are using app-specific apps that can take advantage of the app-specific plugins. But as we mentioned in the keynote, we do have plugins for frameworks. Now, you can take advantage of the plugins for the frameworks, and I'm pretty sure that you will be able to, and that you'll find them very, very useful. You're probably thinking for yourself, we already have this Zend Framework bar, in Zend Framework 2 at least, and we already have the Symfony bar. How is that different? So the Z-Ray is different in several different ways. First of all, it's significantly faster. It's not implemented in pure PHP. The plugging part for the framework is implemented in pure PHP, but we collect a lot of the data, like things like the SQL queries and the request object and so on and so forth. We collect this in C++ at the, or C or C++ at the innermost layers of PHP, of the language. So it's faster. But I think the more important part is what I demonstrated earlier with the mobile demo, is that you can use Z-Ray in a variety of ways, not just as a browser bar, but also using Z-Ray Live, so you can debug your mobile applications, you can debug your toaster applications, and everything is visible to you at just the same level of ease as in-browser applications can be debugged. Andy mentioned that we also support Apigility. Any Apigility users here? Few. If you are not, allow myself to say, not yet using Apigility, you should definitely look into it. I think all of us should be thinking about how to API enable our apps, our web applications, if we're not already doing that. And even if we are already doing that, one of the interesting repeated feedbacks we've heard since we announced Apigility a year ago is that even companies and projects that were implementing APIs decided to drop the implementation gradually, and some of them less gradually, and move over to Apigility because essentially they said, we don't want to be responsible for this layer. We don't want to go on having to maintain it, to evolve it as the standards evolve. We want to benefit from a solution that solves that problem for us. We've seen a bunch of projects and companies switch away from a custom implementation into Apigility. So that's kind of in parentheses, but I definitely recommend that you take a look at Apigility. And you should take advantage of the fact that you're at ZenCon. There's a bunch of Apigility sessions available. Definitely take a look. We also have Apigility plugins available for Z-Ray. So that gives you even better insight into what your requests, your API-enabled requests to Z-Ray look like coming from whatever device they're coming. So let's take a look at a couple of things that may have not been demonstrated during the keynote. By the way, just to verify, how many of you attended the keynote? Maybe some of you are like, okay, basically pretty much everyone. Okay. So I'm not going to repeat everything, just a couple of things that weren't mentioned. First of all, the first thing I mentioned about Z-Ray, that it's so great because essentially you can ignore it, which may sound like a bit funny, but it is an important thing. So it's fairly non-intrusive here, but you can even keep it smaller by minimizing it. So that's one option. It's going to be, it's actually going to be, illustrate another point and switch to an application that doesn't always play nice, like Magento, at least the old version. So as soon as there's something that should require attention, then you will see this badge over there, in this case, a red badge over there, even in the minimized view, that hints you that maybe you should be taking a look at what's going on, and then you can expand and take a look at this, this critical event in this case. While we're on Magento, Maurice mentioned earlier that in development you may have display arrows set to off and you may not see those, and that's probably a good idea, especially if you're working with Z-Ray, not to kind of intermix the arrows with the actual HTML or content of your application. But there's probably most of you have figured out ways to grab this arrow information today. So I think that probably Z-Ray can improve your workflow, but it's probably that part isn't going to radically change your life. One really unique capability of Z-Ray is how it handles the silence operator. Actually, I'm not sure that that's the right way to call it. I'm not sure what it's called. I introduced it 15 years ago, but anyway, the ampersand that you can put to the left of expressions that will essentially turn off any errors or warnings coming from that expression. Personally, I think it's, I use it. I think some people, and probably also people in the audience, consider it a very bad thing to use the silence operator. I actually find that it can be useful in a bunch of ways, but there are cases where sometimes you're suppressing errors in a way that is kind of more than you bargained for. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a piece of code that wants to check whether a file, tries to open a file, and if it fails, then you assume that the file doesn't exist and you create it. So you can use the silence operator there on the open or whatever you're using, and then if it fails, you can create the file. But the problem is that sometimes the failures may not happen the way you expected them to happen. Maybe it didn't fail because the file doesn't exist, but because it's there, but you don't have permissions to open it. And then obviously, as you try to create it, this will fail. So with this, essentially, you would be suppressing the meaningful error or warning message that you would otherwise get, and that bug can take a long time to figure out. So Z-Ray actually has a nice checkbox over here. I'm going to try and increase the font a bit, where it gives us a good indication that there have been 6 errors or warnings that have been silenced. And I can simply click this checkbox here, and immediately I get insight into all of those warnings. So in this case, we have a bunch of VSPNTF warnings that it received too few arguments. Taking a line from Maurice's presentation, I have no idea. I'm not a Magento developer, so I have no idea whether that's OK or not. But being able to very, very easily see silenced errors and warnings can be extremely useful and give you the ability to use a silence operator, but kind of, in a way, turn it off whenever you need to. The function list is another very, very powerful feature of Z-Ray. And again, the fact that it's in your face, but in a non-intrusive way, means that you can take a look at it whenever you're interested to know what happened, but you don't have to when you're not. By default, we only show you functions that are not a part of a known framework. So in this case, we're not seeing all that many functions, just actually 9 of them that we didn't manage to attribute to a known framework. But obviously, we have a pane to the left where we can turn on and off which functions it's showing. So in this case, I can turn back all the PHP native functions, all of the built-in, implemented in C functions. In one toggle of a switch, we can get to see them. And we also have the family of mage, and variant functions all coming from Magento. And I can add them back in. So if I'm a Magento developer and I'm working on a plugin, I may not be all that interested in seeing the Magento functions. I am actually interested in seeing my functions, the ones that are from the plugin, and this ability to hide them, all of the Magento noise, if you will, is very powerful. But if I'm developing Magento itself, or I'm extending one of the basic plugins of Magento, I have the ability to take a look at them back again. And finally, since Magento is using Zend framework, I also have Zend here. I'm only going to see function groups that are actually being used. So for instance, we also recognize Symfony and WordPress and Drupal frameworks. And obviously, since we don't have any of that here, we don't have the toggles for them. So any Magento developers in the audience? Here, OK. So was Maurice right when he said that blocks can be kind of difficult to debug? OK. OK, so I think I think that of all of the things that we've shown today, I think the extensibility API, along with the stock extensions, are perhaps the most important thing here. Because ideally, people who are working on any of those stock apps will have a much easier time as they get started or as they continue developing with a lot more insight in front of their eyes. And I do expect those extensions to also evolve, hopefully very rapidly now that they're in GitHub. And you've seen Maurice create an extension in front of your eyes, very simple, simplistic one, but still getting from essentially nothing into a new pane with information about the app in what, 3 minutes, that's pretty powerful. So I think that since most of you aren't using the stock apps, I think that the message to the rest of you who are developing custom applications is twofold. One, I mentioned already, frameworks. But the other is that if you're developing an application for a client or for your own website, think which parts of the application, which pieces of data from the application would be interesting to have in front of the developer's eyes all the time. And honestly, I think that the biggest challenge is realizing what those pieces of data are. Once you realize what you want to show, grabbing this information is very, very, very easy. And I'm going to try and also show that to you in a minute and try to do a tiny bit of live creation of a new extension that I haven't done before. So we'll see how that goes. Worst case, it doesn't work, and you have some funny thing to tweet about. How miserably failed. Let me pause for a second at this point and ask you whether there are any questions about what was covered so far in the keynote or here. Yeah. Okay, so let me try and repeat the question and tell me if I got it right. Basically, you have more than one layer of PHP or just one layer at the back end?
For example, I have an Apigility project,
Mm-hmm.
but the front end is Angular.
Okay.
How can I see what's happening?
Okay. Great. So let's try to actually see that. So let me repeat the question first of all. The question was, I have an Apigility application, so that's an API-based application on the back end, and the front end is AngularJS. Can I use Apigility? And AngularJS, typically you create a single-page application, so how does that affect us? So I happen, if everything goes well, which it really does, but I happen to have a similar setup, if not identical to what to the questions that was asked. Let's see if I have it installed, or I may have to deploy it. Okay, I don't have it installed, but let's try to do that live. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what I'm doing now, I'm deploying an Apigility application. And that Apigility application, not so surprisingly, uses an AngularJS front end. So essentially, it's the exact use case. By the way, it's not such a huge coincidence. This combination is popular because the Apigility UI itself is built using Angular. So the guys that wrote Apigility also used Angular for the front end of this tiny demo app. It's going slow because it's going over VPN to the other side of the world. We'll get back to that later. In a couple of minutes. Any other questions? Yeah. So Z-Ray is a feature of Zend Server of the developer. In most likelihood, developers would be using it as a part of the developer edition of Zend Server, although it's available in all of the different editions. It plugs into the stack that you get as a part of Zend Server. Andy mentioned earlier that Zend Server is now available for Linux on Power, but we should maybe mention that it's also available to some other equally popular, if not more popular, platforms such as, first of all, Linux on x86, Windows OS X, as well as IBM I. There was a small typo in Andy's slide. It's now available for Ubuntu 14.10. Those of you who use it know that it's not decimal, it's not 14.1. So basically, I think that most popular development platforms it's available for. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was looking around for documentation on how to write extensions. Is there anything you guys have out there?
Okay, great question. There is some documentation, and I can look into that and bring up the URL. I'm going to tweet the URL later. My opinion, the best kind of documentation is taking a look at some of those extensions, and we're going to do a bit of that in a couple of minutes. Now, let me prep for when it finally... Context demo, okay. Finally, we have it. I'm going to create a new vhost for it. Okay, now deploying it. And then, if everything lines in a row, we should be able to see an AngularJS app with a backend that's running on Apigility and see what that looks like. So it's being deployed. Okay, contacts demo. Okay, so this is a tiny sample app that I just deployed. And when I say tiny, I don't know, that point is not that the font is tiny, so I'll make it a bit bigger. So that's essentially a bunch of Zend framework contributors. And this is a single page application. So as I move forward, it's over VPN, so it's really, really slow. Okay, let me just try a quick reload just to make sure that my screen, that my font resizing didn't drive it nuts. There we go. So now we're seeing the Z information for this page, but actually, you see the badge here of 2. That means that already 2 requests were collected. So we can get some insight into which requests were those. So we have index.php, but actually pretty much immediately, the single page application made another request. Angular made another request to the Apigility backend of contacts with page equals 1. And I can switch to see this one. And here, we also see a bunch of Apigility specific information and Zend framework specific information. There wasn't much of that going on in index.php. This is pretty simplistic, but as soon as we get to the actual content, we begin to see the stuff that's really behind the app. And as I move to the next page, I get this additional request that was just generated. So I get to see all of the AJAX requests coming from Angular in this case, but of course it could work with anything else. And I get the full list of them, and I can switch between all the requests that were made from this page right here inside Z-Ray. And whenever I switch, whenever I select it, essentially you can see that the bar itself changes. And then I can move to all of the different pieces of information that I have with Z-Ray. Now that's one way to do it. With single page applications, I think this works really well. But the other way to do it is also to open up Z-Ray Live. And then essentially, we don't care where the request is coming from. We're going to see anything that's happening. So let's open Z-Ray Live for a second and do this. And we can even, if you're bugged with Z-Ray, you can actually just disable it completely for the session. And it's still loading. It's on a slow link. Okay. You know what? I'm going to switch over to something that's, oh, there we go. I frightened it. So as I move to the next page, I no longer have Z-Ray inside my browser, but if all goes well, I should see the request popping here. And this is Ajax, it's spawning. I hope that it works. It appears to be a bit slow. Okay, let's move to, we don't want to go old as we wait for that. So let's switch to something that's a bit faster, hopefully. That's Magento on Amazon. Shouldn't be slow. That's the let's even go to WordPress. That should be even faster. And fire up Z-Ray Live. And why is it secure mode? Let's fix that. Yes, someone is playing with the server as I'm playing with it. I hope that I'm not going to bump into them. So you see that WordPress Okay, let's give it a second to switch modes. Okay, so here we have WordPress. We have it with Z-Ray. I'm going to show you, well, we have Z-Ray, and I can switch to Z-Ray Live. The Z-Ray Live view here should hopefully be a bit quicker than the VPN one. And then as soon as I do, any requests that I'm making here should show up here as well. So you see, you get the full list of requests, and as I kind of move between the different requests, I see all of them here. And on the right side, it could be anything. It could be Angular, it could be a mobile device, it could be a toaster, it could be Google Glasses or whatever. Everything will be available to you. Any other questions before I dive into some extensions? Yeah. So presently, no, but that sounds like a nice feature. Happy, I'll take it back, and if you have some other insight on how to do that, please either write me or let's talk after that. But right now, the assumption is that you're going to be using Z-Ray Live on your own development box. So this isn't something, maybe I should make the point, this isn't something that you should be using on a production website. Z-Ray Live on a production website, first of all, unless your website is really not popular, then you're going to be just flooded with information. And also, Z-Ray does have some overhead. It's fast, but it does have some overhead, so we definitely don't recommend using Z-Ray Live on a production website. So hopefully you shouldn't have too many out-of-context requests, and you should be aware of the context, but it can be interesting to also group it based on the session. Any other questions so far? Okay, so let's take a quick look at what extensions look like, because I think that, like I mentioned this before, I think that extensions, the extensibility is one of the key features of Z-Ray in Zend Server 8 that you should all be taking advantage of, either through those ready-made extensions or by creating new ones. So let's take a quick look to dive into what an extension looks like. And let me try to get the font bigger. Yeah, okay. I don't even remember how to change the font. You know what, we'll do something really simple. The font is a bit bigger here. We lost syntax highlighting, but at least we have the bigger font. But does anyone know how to change the font size on Studio? I didn't do that in recent years, so I'm seeing it. What? Nope. Okay. Come again? Editor font size. You know what? Actually, colors and fonts. There we go. Use search. Font size. Yeah, I'm in the right place. Basic text font. Okay, let's see how that goes. Good. Is that big enough, or make it even bigger? I'll make it slightly bigger, now that we have the technology. Okay, so basically, first of all, before we look at the code, let's think about the concept for a second. Zend Server will essentially look at this special directory, the ZA/extensions directory, and it will look inside of it and search for additional directories which contain extensions. The extensions are simple ZA.php files and optionally a logo. It will then load all of them into memory, so they should be lightweight. You shouldn't have anything in the global scope of those ZA.php files that takes a lot of time, because they're going to run as a part of essentially every request that is ZA enabled. And then conceptually, the main way ZA works is that you tap into function calls. You essentially tell ZA which function calls you want to tap into, and then you provide it with some sort of decorators, essentially callbacks that will be called either the entrance to the function or when you leave the function, or both. So let's take a look. We're creating a new ZA extension Drupal that is actually one of the main class here. That's the class that contains my customized callbacks, those callbacks that collect information from Drupal. And we create a new ZA extension. We name it Drupal. The name needs to be unique, but shouldn't be too difficult to create one. And we can provide it with a bit of metadata, in this case, the logo PNG. There can be more types of metadata. You can create pretty advanced. Essentially, you can create any kind of pane inside ZA that you want. We have some simplistic panes where you essentially don't need to do anything. You just collect the data. But if you want to create some sort of a graph or a map or anything, you can use custom panels and create essentially any kind of UI that you may want to do. That's kind of outside the scope of this presentation, but I think we're going to touch that on the Uncon session. So if you're interested in how to learn on how to do that, then you're welcome to join the Uncon session. Then the set enabled after, that's a key important part here. Essentially, it tells Zend Server whether it gives it an indication when to know that this extension should kick in. Because like I mentioned, essentially, all of those extensions are going to be loaded into each and every request. And if I have WordPress, for instance, running, it's still going to load the Drupal application into memory. It's kind of useless to collect Drupal information inside WordPress. So that's why we have this set enabled after API that instructs ZA or hints at when to consider this essentially a Drupal application. In this case, as soon as we see the function Drupal bootstrap being called, then we know that this is Drupal, and we'll start tracing all of those other Drupal methods and APIs that are part of that extension. So we have several different tracing capabilities, but by far the most important one is the ability to trace functions, which I just mentioned. And it's a very, very simple API. Essentially, the first argument is which function you want to trace. I should maybe show you at least one other example so that you see that when we're not talking about global functions, simplistic kind of PHP 4-star functions, we have this simple notation. So it's kind of the most advanced PHP 5.3, I think, and later notation. So we have here both namespaces, or actually 5.4, right? Namespaces that go into a class and a method. So you can essentially denote any type of method that you would want to tap to. And then the second argument is a callback that will be called at the entrance to the function, right before the code of the function begins to execute. And the second callback, callable, will be called at the end of this function call. So, by the way, in the GA, we're going to do a tiny optimization and make it possible to pass null in here so that we're not going to be calling a lot of empty functions. But for now, you have to specify an empty function even if you don't want to do anything. Now, let's take a look at what the callbacks look like. So let's take a look at, say, module invoke, and it's going to call into, well, module invoke inside my special class. So all of the callbacks receive two arguments. The first one is the context, and the second one is passed by reference, and this is the storage, argument. Now it's a bit of the storage argument is passed by reference and allows you to save information, the information that you then want to eventually make it into the Z-Ray bar. Now, Z-Ray works. There's essentially 4 sections to Z-Ray. It first collects information. It then stores it in the database. That happens in the context of the request. And then Z-Ray loads. That's no longer a part of the original request. It plugs in as a separate frame. It goes to a different URL. It loads from Zend Server. It doesn't load from your app. And then it fetches, the third stage is that it fetches the information that was stored, and the final stage is that it displays it. Storage here allows you to essentially take the information that you just tapped into and store it, and by default, you don't need to do anything for the third and fourth stage. You're going to have a default implementation that essentially takes this information, loads it into Z and displays it. So, for instance, let's try to do something new that we don't have yet. So we don't have support for Joomla, but I did install it yesterday on my Windows box. And I created you know what, actually, why am I doing that? Let's just do this. And I created a simple, really simple, you can see that it barely contains any code. This is from like 1 a.m. last night. I created a simplistic extension that has 2 traces. I'm actually going to get rid of one of them. We're not going to create a really real-life extension. And let me even show you how I got to learn about, what I should do here. So I'm going to comment out essentially everything, and I'm going to go back and reload. This is the stock Joomla that you're going to get as you install it. Nothing, no Z-Ray, no special information here. So I kind of assumed, I took a look at the list of functions, and I assumed that Joomla, like essentially all apps, probably has some sort of an event mechanism. So I looked for some usual suspects. I looked for dispatch. I looked for event. And after a bit of digging, maybe just a few more seconds more than I've just shown, it's less than a minute, I realized that probably the mechanism or the method that is being used by Joomla, let me increase the font size again, sorry, to fire events is this JEvent dispatcher trigger. The fact that it's been called 25 times and not just once or twice, also kind of in addition to the name, got me to the conclusion that it's probably the event mechanism, the way that Joomla throws events. And again, prior to yesterday at 1 a.m., I've never played with Joomla. I just want to kind of try and repeat the same thing that I do with Symfony and see how quickly I can get some piece of interesting information out of Joomla. So once I realized that the JEvent dispatcher trigger is an interesting thing to tap into, or thought at least that would be interesting to tap into, what I did is this. I basically told Z-Ray to set the Joomla extension enabled after it sees this trigger callback, and to call dispatch trigger exit as this function terminates. And since I had absolutely no idea what might be interesting in this callback, what I did next is I essentially dumped all of the information inside the context. So here I am displaying to you real world print-based introspection. Now let's hit reload. We don't need to do anything special. We don't need to deploy anything. It just works. So if and when you guys are going to be working on new extensions, you'll see that the flow to create new extensions is actually very, very easy. And here we see the context that is passed to us. So the function name, well, that's not all that surprising. Then we have the function arguments, which is an array. Just one argument is being passed, and it's a string on after a session start. OK, that sounds kind of like it's probably the event name. And then we have, there was no exception thrown and there was no exception, but if there was one at the end of the function, if an exception was thrown inside of it, you have full access to the exception. First of all, the exception that was, the fact that an exception was thrown, and then full access to this exception object, and you can do all sorts of interesting things. And you have access, if this is a method, you have access to the full this object. So in this case, we have full access to the JEvent dispatcher object, and we happen to have what I believe to be the full publish and subscribe map for the event mechanism in Joomla. So essentially, we see that on after session start, there's those handlers, JApplication site objects, and so on and so forth. And then there's, let's see if there's anything, well, just one handler. And then we see another call to JEvent dispatch trigger, this time on after initialize. So I'm not going to pretend that at 1 a.m. I managed to create a full-fledged application. I'm not going to bore you in trying to create a full-fledged Joomla extension online. But I figured that at least this first argument, which happens to be the event name, could be interesting. So let me, instead of just uncommenting it, let's kind of do it for real. I'm now going to create a new panel, events. And that's the notation. There's a reason behind this notation, and when we publish the docs, you'll understand it. But essentially, I'm adding a new line of information. We could have, essentially here, on every call to dispatch trigger exit, we would be collecting a new instance of an event. So that's why we have this add next element notation. And then I can have an array of data. And right now, the only data that I have is the event name. Name, event name. And we're going to take it out of the context. So just to recap what we're seeing here, this corresponds to the first argument that was passed to JEvent dispatcher trigger, which we've seen earlier is the event name. And if everything goes well and all the disclaimers, like Maurice said earlier, if we reload, we should have now a brand new panel that contains, OK, didn't work well, so we see a syntax error. It still can't fix automatic syntax errors for me. So let's see, what did I do wrong? Storage. Oh yeah, I forgot PHP is really fussy about that. OK. I still didn't get it right. Context. No, I think I did. Let's Okay. So if everything went well, we should see a new panel here. It has a default Zend Server logo, but of course you can change the logo very easily in the metadata. And now, immediately, I have all of the events, essentially, from Joomla. We just collected a brand new piece of data that, prior to yesterday at 1 a.m. at least, was never collected before in Zend Server. And I'm sure that someone who's knowledgeable about Joomla can probably create, in a couple of hours, a full-fledged Joomla plugin. And I'm not sure that we have too many Joomla developers in the audience, but the takeaway here is that you can create such extensions for your application, collecting your interesting data very, very easily. And to illustrate just one last tiny point, let's add another piece of data. Okay, and gets the, oh, php.net is down? No, it's not. So min and max, let's add another random number here and reload again. And this added another column. Now what I want to show you is not just how amazingly PHP generates random numbers, but you get some simple things out of the box, like sorting. You can sort based on columns. Really, the API allows you to focus on just collecting the data and doing a minimal amount of work afterwards. If I added arrays into it, it will automatically add tree UIs into it. Like I mentioned, you can create custom UIs, but for the most part, the most important element is to just collect the data, figure out what data you want to collect, and implement the tiny bits of code that collect it. Okay, thank you all. Again, apologies. The keynote slightly made this presentation, well, not slightly, it radically changed it because I didn't want to just repeat it, which was the original idea. We felt that it was just so exciting that we decided to do most of the, or large parts of the keynote around it, but obviously that took away from this session. So I hope it wasn't too boring. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to either grab me here or contact me over email or over Twitter. We'll be very, very happy to get any feedback, good or bad, about Z-Ray, about Zend Server, about PHP. Everything is open. Thank you, guys.